Welcome to Hungry for Answers with me, Robin Clare, recovery coach professional. Do you love food, alcohol, drugs, sex, social media, cigarettes, or gambling a little too much? The traditional narrative says that addiction to these vices is the problem. The truth is, they are just symptoms. This hit show takes you from recovery to your ultimate life as my special guests and I help you discover how underneath every vice is the addiction to the suffering that developed due to unhealed trauma. So what can you do? Hungry for Answers provides groundbreaking, proven solutions from my best-selling spiritual book, Feast and Famine: Healing Addiction with Grace. It's time to stop suffering and start living your ultimate life. You have a divine right to a life filled with love, joy, peace, and abundance. Hungry for Answers starts now. Hello, everybody. It's Robin Clare, and welcome to Hungry for Answers. In an article I read the other day, it said that 23 million Americans are in recovery from drug and alcohol addiction. And I find that answer interesting for many reasons. One being that we know that drug and alcohol abuse are just two of the many forms of addiction. But what I started thinking about is who's helping all of these people, right? Who is in their lives that can help them not only move out of addiction, but then have a safe and long-term recovery? And I remember a term that I learned from my guest when I was taking my recovery coach professional designation, and the term was a recovery ally. And so I thought it would be really great to have Stacy Charpentier, the director of training for CCAR, the Connecticut Community for Addiction Recovery, on the episode today to talk about the recovery ally. So Stacy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
Yes, I'm so glad you're here too. So I have a question I ask all my guests, and that is, was there ever a time in your life where you were so hungry for answers that you just weren't sure that you were going to get the answers that you needed for your life?
You know, I've been thinking a lot about different stages of my life. Obviously, more recently, and in my position as director of training and seeing people go through the recovery process. And I myself, because I'm a family member, I never really thought that I had my own recovery process, that I was also in need of some kind of healing or just acknowledgement of what I've gone through as a child of somebody who was an addict for so long. And I think that in the position that I'm in now and going through, as you mentioned, the Recovery Coach Academy, which is the training that people take in order to get their recovery coach professional, is when I realized that I had become so divorced from that other person, that I was that child of an addict and everything else. And it's still such a huge part of me. And that can actually bring me to be able to provide inspiration and hope to other people by sharing that story, by sharing some of the things that, I went through,
Yes.
um, and just trying to figure it out like we all are.
Yes. And in my life, I am in recovery too, but I'm also a recovery ally for a sibling. And so I really appreciate both sides of the coin. And I think sometimes
Mm,
we have place so much emphasis on the addict in recovery that we forget about all the recovery allies that are out there. So one of the things that you had when we were chatting before the
mhm,
show, you had said to me that as a child of someone who is an addict, there's almost like a fork in the road that you have to
mhm.
choose. One side of the fork says, I'm not, yeah, I'm going to believe everything that the addict said to me, and I'm going to go that route also. or I'm going to change. I'm going to break the cycle in our family and I'm going to become a recovery ally. So, for our audience, can you define what is recovery? What is an ally? And what is a recovery ally?
Sure. Recovery is different for many different people, but for me, recovery means living a fulfilled life, reaching the potential that I'm supposed to have in all areas of my life. I don't think that it's just one piece. And I think a lot of times when somebody's in addiction, we focus on that one piece, but that person has to rebuild a whole life, not just the detox from the addiction or getting over those cravings or whatever those things are. A lot of times they need to rebuild relationships with their family. Maybe they need to go and find meaningful employment or go back to school or think about other aspects of their health and wellness, and so to me, recovery is really holistic. It's the whole person. It's not just that one thing. It's everything.
Yeah,
And I think that definition is different for everybody, what that looks like. And an ally is somebody who is, and it could be somebody who's been affected either by a loved one, family member, or whatever, or somebody who is just extremely passionate and wants to see people find recovery because they see that it's possible. You said 23 million people, that's a lot of people. And a lot of people aren't sharing their story because of the stigma that's attached to it. So we need other people to maybe help us to share our stories, to know that it's safe to share our stories, that we're not going to be living in shame if we come out of that shadow and say, yes, I'm in recovery from something. And so to have allies that help support the cause, the message that can help promote hope is just going to bring so much more light to a subject that really has been in the dark for a very long time. We typically see people talking about the negative aspects of addiction, and nobody really focuses on recovery and how
right.
positive that can be.
Yes,
Hmm.
I would agree with that. And there were a couple of things that you said. I just want to make a comment. Is that, people who are affected by having someone in their life that is an addict can be in recovery too,
Hmm.
right? Alongside the addict who's in recovery. Because I want to honor all of those people that have been impacted by the stress and
Hmm.
and the negative behavior of someone that they love.
Hmm.
And that I really honestly, I'm not sure I thought about that until you just said it earlier today about your dad, that
Mm.
you were in recovery also from the impact that his relationship had on you. And so I just want to honor everyone out there who is in recovery from the person who what impacted them through that person's addiction. And the other thing I wanted to say is, I think that when we look at the 23 million, I
Mm.
believe that it's probably a lot larger than that due to two reasons. One, drugs and alcohol are just two of the many addictions, but two, I don't think they're tracking recovery as
Mhm.
as well as they're tracking addiction. Right? We know how many people go into an addiction center and all of those kind of things, but we're not always tracking how well people are doing in recovery. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think that, data, and people are always asking us, is there data? Can you show us outcomes? And even in the programs that we have here at CCAR, like recovery coaches going into emergency departments, we can go in and we can talk about how many people we've seen. We can talk about how many people we've connected to services to promote their definition of recovery. Um, But at some point, once that person becomes well, or once that person falls out of a system, so to speak, it's hard to know, have they stayed? Have they sustained their recovery? Because there is no real way to track it. Um, and so you are absolutely correct as far as not really knowing a true number. We know how many people we see in our centers, we know how many people we support, how many programs we support, but you know, we don't know a lot of times what people do after,
Right.
and I
Right.
think that's the important part that isn't getting a lot of the attention, which is something that CCAR strives to do, is to put that positive face on recovery. Um, you know, when we first started working in emergency departments, there was a lot of stigma around people who were coming into emergency rooms, taking up beds, taking up time, and because they were there for an addiction. And that's really why recovery coaches were brought in, to help really talk and spend the time with people who are coming in for an addiction, and taking the time to connect them to a service or a resource, detox, treatment, whatever that might be, so that they can get some help, rather than nurses and doctors merely kind of saying, up, this person's here again. It's just they're taking up room in our emergency room and whatever. But the nurses and doctors never saw the positive aspect of what happens when that person leaves, unless that person comes in again and again and again,
Right.
and
Right.
then may become what is called like frequent flyers. And what we try to do is we try to use the term friendly faces, and so recovery coaches came in, and they were able to say to those doctors and nurses, like, last year that was me, and look at me now. And so they finally got to see
Hmm.
a positive a positive view of what recovery can do, because a lot of times those people, those first responders, they're just seeing people in the throes of an addiction,
Yes.
not in the best light.
Let me ask you a question though. Does someone have to have an addiction story to be a successful recovery ally in a professional capacity?
No, I don't believe so. I think that if you are somebody who can be empathetic, who can walk with somebody, regardless
Mhm.
of what their pathway is, regardless of what their addiction was or whatever, and you want to see people be successful and succeed, and you have within you a way to motivate and inspire people, I think you can help anybody. We don't look at any other field and say you have to have had this in order to do this.
Correct.
We don't do that with anybody else. And for some reason, there's this, kind of marriage to, you have to have a recovery story. In many circles, I don't have a recovery story because I
Right.
myself am not an addict. But I can tell you that addiction affected my life so much, and
Mhm.
I see miracles around me. I can inspire other people through what I went through.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that I don't have a voice in this conversation, or a desire to give back to this population, because, this it's very similar to what I've experienced in my childhood and through my adulthood,
Yeah,
in my own family.
that's great. So we're going to be heading towards a break. You're listening to Hungry for Answers, and when we return, we'll start talking more about the recovery ally in as a friend and a family member. So we'll be right back, everybody. Hello and welcome back to Hungry for Answers with me, Robin Clare, your host. If you'd like to learn more about me or my offerings, please go to clarity.com. That's CLARE-ITY.com. And I'm here with Stacy Charpentier from CCAR, the Connecticut Community for Addiction Recovery. And Stacy, how can folks reach you?
Well, we are located in Hartford, Connecticut, so you can call our main number at 860-244-2227. And you can also email me at Stacy, it's Stacy at CCAR.us.
Wonderful. Thank you. So, in the recovery coach professional training, Phil Valentine, the executive director of CCAR, said something to me that was very profound, or not to me, to everyone, all of us, that you are in recovery when you say you are. And I found that to be very profound. And in fact, I had that same conversation with a client um, this year because everyone was telling her she wasn't in recovery,
Mm,
and I got to use that, and it just helped her, just reminded her of, that she may have slipped a little, but she was still in recovery. And
mhm.
so, can you describe that? What Phil meant by that?
Sure. So, in what I shared earlier, how recovery is different for everyone, everyone has their own definition of what recovery means and what it looks like. And it's funny that you say a slip because there are very much people who believe that recovery is an abstinence of all substances, smoking, coffee, drugs, alcohol, you name it. There are some that think that a little bit is okay. There are some that feel like,
Mhm.
well, I was, using IV drugs, and so I'm okay to have alcohol. Everybody's definition is different. And for us, it's up to you to decide your definition, and it's really nobody else's judgment what works for you or what can work for you. Harm reduction is a pathway that people use and that can help keep people um alive. Because there are people that, if somebody told them that they couldn't ever use anything ever again, that could be scary.
Mhm.
And we allow people who are addicted to things like nicotine or caffeine, even because there's such a huge withdrawal from those things. They're absolute things that happen in your body that can cause suffering, headaches, and withdrawal symptoms and things. We allow people to step down,
Yeah,
but we don't allow people to do that with anything else, and so for us, it's just a matter of allowing somebody the freedom to figure out what recovery means to them, what it looks like for them, and just helping them walk that path,
I like
you
that.
know?
I like that
Mhm.
a lot. And in writing Feast and Famine, my
Mm.
book on recovery from addiction, I discovered that what I believe we're all addicted to is suffering. And the suffering that happened because of the trauma that we experienced in our childhood, our teen years, our adult, maybe even past lives, if you believe that. And this trauma is becomes, if it's not healed, turns into suffering. And if we don't heal the suffering, then we start looking for addictive behaviors to help us to feel better. And that once we decide we are going to stop doing the addictive behavior, what do you think is the importance of doing the healing your trauma in the recovery process?
I think this goes back to that holistic approach of not just dealing with the addiction. You know, if there is trauma, if somebody is thinking that trauma is what caused them to become addicted, and we go back and forth because there are people who believe that addicts must have a mental health issue and that's why, or there must be something in that vein. And then there are some people that believe that no, I could have just, because of hereditary, because of my genetics, I ended up picking up that can of beer as a teenager and I couldn't put it down.
Mhm.
Again, either one is right, depending on the person who is looking to find recovery for themselves. If you feel that there is childhood trauma, if you feel that you are using alcohol or drugs as a way to self-medicate feelings or things that you have going on, I think you should explore that. If you're somebody who is going to sit there and say, there's nothing wrong with me, I just should have never done this or what, there's nothing wrong with that either. I think we have to meet people where they're at. And if
Right.
somebody is, when they start unpacking some of these things through a recovery process, if somebody came to me and said, I'm really starting to feel like now maybe it was my anxiety, or maybe I was feeling a little depressed, I'm not a person who is clinically trained. Recovery coaches generally are not. I
Yes.
would refer that person to a mental health professional to talk about those things. And there's nothing wrong with working through. I mean, when you go to a doctor, you might be seeing a doctor for a certain condition and then also need to see another doctor for another condition. And you can work those pathways and those remedies, at the same time. You could even at some point even invite, the doctors to talk together or to review records. Maybe one is affecting the other or what have you. But the same thing I believe happens here, where you might have a whole a whole pot of things that you need to address, and you might have different people that would be working with you to address all those things. And so we always say that as recovery coaches, we stay in our lane.
Mhm.
We focus on recovery, we focus on recovery wellness planning. If something comes up that happens to be a medical, mental health, or
Yeah.
what have you, we refer them to the right people so that they can get the resources and the help that they need to do that.
So just for clarity purposes,
Mhm,
when you say we focus on recovery, you're not
mhm,
focusing on the stopping of the addiction itself. That is a whole nother lane, right? That's an addiction counselor or, an addiction professional. A recovery coach or a recovery professional or even a recovery ally,
mhm.
a family and friend member or professional steps in to their role when a person who is addicted has committed to stopping using their substance or whatever it is that they're doing at the level that is comfortable for them.
It's both and, right?
Right.
So, as I said, we have recovery coaches. I mean, historically, that's how things happened, where people either went into treatment or they went into detox. And when they came out and they were looking for help in navigating life after treatment or after detox, they were connected with maybe a recovery community center or a recovery coach that would help them navigate their life after that event. But we're finding that recovery coaches can also have a place initiating recovery.
Yeah.
So, as I said, as far as recovery coaches going into and working at emergency departments, we've
Yeah.
had people that were trained, who are first responders, who want to understand the skills, because they're in that moment, could ask a good question, could plant that seed of hope that might get somebody to think a little differently, and maybe that pathway changes. And so with our emergency room department program, and a recovery coach would come out, and if a person presents in the emergency room and the nurse offers that person because they are presenting with addiction issues or whatever, she may offer them, or he may offer them, the opportunity to
Oops.
function. How are you doing? How are things go? What brought you here? All of those good questions, and maybe what do you want to do next? And so we might at that point help provide them with some resources, help
Right.
provide them with, do they want treatment? Do they want detox? Do they want to, can they do that right now? Is their home and support system able for them to leave? A lot of times people have children, pets, family, jobs, they can't just say, yep, I need to go and I'm going right now.
Right.
Life happens. And so they might coach that person for a few days, and let's keep in touch. Let's check in tomorrow. Let's check in the next day and keep coaching them, and maybe they get hooked up at a recovery community center, or maybe, they initiate that recovery process, but maybe they choose not to do detox or not to do treatment. So
Right.
I think it's both. And so I think that's why here at CCAR, we look at, you know, we have an emergency department recovery coaching program that trains people because it's different. You might be coming in at a different stage of somebody's journey than somebody who's already made that commitment to recovery, and then they need help, walking some some steps forward on their
You
journey. So I think it's both and.
Thank
Mhm.
you. Thank you. So I was thinking about in indigenous and energy healing, there's
Mhm.
a saying that when you do your healing, when you come into recovery and you do your healing, you heal 5 generations back
Mhm.
and 5 generations forward. And I
Yeah.
just love that. And so I want to, talk to a moment to the very courageous folks who are listening that are
Mm.
either in recovery or considering being in recovery, knowing that the work that you're doing today or considering doing will help ensure that energetically and ancestrally, there's healing going on for your ancestors, as well as healing that is taking place not just for you, but for all the generations going forward. And so, if you have
Mm.
children, know that your healing will impact them and your grandchildren. So, know that and keep that in mind, everybody, that this healing that you're doing is not just for you. And so, we're going to take another break. This is Hungry for Answers with Robin Clare and my guest, Stacy Charpentier, and we'll be right back. Hello, and welcome back to Hungry for Answers with me, Robin Clare, and my guest, Stacy Charpentier. And so I'm going to give away a copy of Feast and Famine Healing Addiction with Grace to the first caller at 1 800 930 2819. That's 1 800 930 2819. So, as promised, now we're going to go to the role of the recovery ally who might be a family member or a friend. So interesting. I don't know, this thought just passed through my head is, family members just go through so much, right? And friends go through so much, and there's so much that's asked of them. But I think that there's a jump that happens when they begin to see themselves as an ally, right? A recovery ally. There's a lot of frustration. And so, the part of the conversation here today is to honor the recovery ally who has been through so much, with their loved one that is, you know, it was in addiction and is now, making the choice to stay sober. So what are your thoughts on that? Like about how frustrating it was, and then how do you find the faith really? And I'm not talking necessarily from a religious standpoint, but a faith that you can have faith in the addict that they will stay in recovery.
That's always hard. I think that's one of the biggest questions that we get asked a lot of times is, am I enabling or am
Yes.
I supporting? Like, how do I know? And I think it's different for every person, For me, and I talk about the fact that I kind of divorced myself from my dad when he was in the throes of an addiction because he was not he was clearly not committed to recovery. He had many times where he would go into treatment or something would happen, a car accident, heart attack, and he would go into treatment and promise to be better, and then as soon as he was cleared or as soon as things were okay, he would go back out. And for me, I couldn't I didn't want that around my children. I didn't want that kind of chaos because I had grown up in chaos, and I
Mhm.
just didn't want that for my life. And so I really divorced myself from him, really, and that relationship. And I always thought in the back of my head, because I'd gotten the phone calls and the things that came up in his life when he got arrested, or when he was going to detox, or when like I said, he had a heart attack. It was always like that phone call of, okay, he's still with us and he's hanging in, and let me run and let me kind of come in and be with him and let him know that I'm his daughter no matter what. And then he would kind of slink away, and then I wouldn't know where he was for a while, and until the
Right.
next incident happened. And so he made it easy to stay separated. Um but I think for me, I always kept thinking like, I'm going to get that phone call and then I'm going to regret not being there or not having been part of this, or what could I have done better. And I kept second guessing things that I was doing. It was something like I said, chaos, really. So even though I wasn't living in chaos, I mean, in my head and around this relationship, it was still chaotic. And then my dad found recovery.
Mhm.
He had hit rock bottom. He was in a marriage where they were both using, and he had hit rock bottom in that and divorced that person and ended up going and getting services at the VA. He was a Vietnam vet. Um, and he was finally starting to heal, finally starting to address some things that had happened in his life. There was a history of addiction in his family.
Mhm.
He, as I said, went over to Vietnam as an 18-year-old kid, came back. He got married to my mom in Hawaii. She flew out there, they eloped. When he was home, they had me like right away. And so here are two 21-year-old kids
Wow.
having a kid just coming back from a war. I mean, it's no wonder, Um, but seeing him in recovery and seeing the change in him, I was able to rebuild a relationship with him. And my dad ended up getting cancer soon after he found recovery. Like soon after his whole life was in order, he had gotten cancer and it was stage 4. And I was there for that,
Yeah.
that short time, before he passed away. But I remember being at his house and opening up the fridge, and my dad still smoked cigarettes because that's just who he was, and he still drank coffee because that's who he was. But I remember opening up the fridge and seeing like a 6 pack of Bud Light and being like so judgmental, like already. Like I was like, what are you doing? Like, you're in recovery. You can't do this. Like, what are you doing? You're on Suboxone. You're on, like, what do you do? Like, you just did so well. Like, and I remember him saying to me, Stacy, I'm dying and I want this. I want to be able to have a beer once in a while. So I'm gonna have one. And it's not, that doesn't mean I'm throwing my recovery away. It just means that I'm living what little of my life I have left. And it, and I thought at that moment, like I could have sat there and very much said, I can't be here for this.
Mhm.
You're going against, what I think recovery is. You're going against, and it took a lot to just be like, yeah, you're right.
It
Like,
it seems like, Stacy, it seems like your definition of what recovery is, maybe
mhm.
having a little bit, it is what the person says it is. It seems like
Yes.
that has shifted over the years
Yes.
for
For
you
sure.
after being at CCAR and seeing, that there are just so many different varieties of recovery. But I have a question on a few things that you said in this
Sure.
segment. One
Mhm.
is the word enabling
Mm.
versus supportive. I imagine that every recovery ally ever born
Mhm.
has been accused of enabling an addict. So let's talk about the word enabling. What
Yeah.
is the difference between enabling and supporting?
I think for me, at least in my own definition of it, I think a lot of people feel like if they support their loved one who is walking a path of recovery, that they're in some form enabling certain things. And I think
Mm,
we really do have to separate those two terms. You know, if somebody is working a program, whatever that program is, or whatever that may look like to them, and you are providing to them support, whether it be shelter, whether it be financial support while they get their feet on the ground, or whatever it is, a lot of people will feel like, am I enabling this
yes,
person? Am I, and I think, again, it's that faith thing. Like, as long as you understand the process and that pathway that that person is on, and it's done as a more of a support and not I don't want to say you don't want to do more work than the recovery does, because we say that in recovery coaching too.
mhm,
Like, you don't want to just pay somebody's rent for a whole year if they're not going out there actively looking for work. You know what I mean? There's differences. And so I think it's going to be different for everybody, but I think part of the support that we can give to people is just the faith and the relationship and the encouragement and the motivation. But knowing that when somebody is in recovery, and this was a big thing for me, it's not done after that 30-day stint in rehab. It's not done after those 90 days. Like, it's almost like from that point forward is when that real journey starts, when they have to start rebuilding their life. And so the things that a family member or an ally can do is just understanding that it's a lifelong process, that it's not just better, and that things aren't always going to be like nobody's road is perfectly traveled. There are dips and detours and roadblocks and stumbling, and to just know that to be there with care and concern, it, as opposed to judgment,
yes,
and to
yes,
just understand.
mhm,
I think it does a lot. I was very judgmental when I saw that beer. Like, I was like,
yeah,
oh, everything's
yes,
blowing up, and he was just like, listen, you know, I, I
yeah,
just want a beer, and I had to be okay with that, and saw that he was okay with it.
yes,
You
and
know.
I think, to the recovery allies listening out there, you know your loved one. You know
Hmm.
whether you're really enabling them based upon past experience. You know whether tough love is the recipe for the day or that you should support them unconditionally.
Hmm.
Trust your own intuition, trust
Hmm.
your own knowing of what is best for yourself, first of all, and then what is best for the person in recovery. So, we are going to our next break. You're listening to Hungry for Answers with me, Robin Clare, and my guest, Stacy Charpentier. We'll be right back. Hello, and welcome back to Hungry for Answers with me, Robin Clare. If you would like more information about my offerings, please go to clarity.com. That's CLARE-ITY.com. And I'm here with Stacy Charpentier from CCAR, the Connecticut Community for Addiction Recovery. And Stacy, one more time, how can people reach you or CCAR?
So to reach CCAR, we have our main number is 860-244-2227. Our website is simply ccar.us. And to reach me, you can reach me at my email. It's just Stacy, Stacy, at ccar.us.
That's great. Thank you. So, in this segment, we're going to talk about CCAR, the Connecticut
Mhm.
Community for Addiction Recovery. So, can you just share what is the mission of CCAR?
Sure. It's simply to put a face on recovery and to provide recovery support services, which we do through our training that you've attended to become a recovery coach professional. We also have various advocacy efforts that we have, and we also have centers here in Connecticut where anybody who is looking to either access services for recovery, find out more about recovery, are able to just walk up to any of our 5 centers across the state of Connecticut and immediately have a bevy of resources and supports as they need them.
Yeah. So last year, during
Hmm.
COVID is when I became a recovery coach professional. And like every other business, CCAR had to really rally and pull that training online. And prior to that, it was in person. What's the model now for the recovery coach training?
We're still online. As you know, Connecticut was very strict throughout COVID, and making sure that people were social distancing and the capacity limits were in place. And so we found that by going online, we actually took a lot of barriers to training away.
Mm,
Even though there's nothing like being in person and learning with people and having that same that kind of connection with somebody that you're able to have a conversation with across the table. But there are many people that prefer to train online, that are have a preference to be able to kind of schedule in when they have screen time. It's easier, and people used to have to take time off from work, come to Connecticut, take a whole week. There's travel, there's meal. It's just a lot. And so
mhm.
to be able to access our training on screen, we found that we took a lot of the barriers to get trained away. And so for right now, we're staying online, and that's not to say that at some point we won't have both models available, but for the time being, this is working. We're getting a great response, and people are feeling the same sense of engagement in a virtual room than they did in the live classroom. So
Yeah.
this is where we are. Yeah.
So, so someone wants to become a recovery coach professional. Do they do that for both professional reasons and personal reasons?
Yes. So just like both there are some people that when they come through the RCA and they learn about the recovery process, sometimes it could be that they want to find a profession in recovery coaching. We've had family members who come who just want to understand the recovery process and think about
Mhm.
themselves as a recovery ally by the time they're done with it. Um, but there are many reasons. It could be that an agency is implementing a recovery coaching program. And so some of the directors or clinicians want to come and learn what it means to be a recovery coach and how am I going to implement this program. And so there are many people who come in through the RCA for a variety of reasons. Um, Regardless, at the end of it, it's always changed them in some way. They've
Yes.
learned something more about themselves, something more about the recovery process. And so for some, it really kind of ignites a spark that they want to do more. And so I think that's where people, if they decide that they want to work in this field, obviously you need more training and more experience. You can take additional trainings, get additional hours of experience in order to either be certified if states have a state certification or to be designated by CCAR. CCAR is widely known
Mm,
as the leader of training recovery coaches. And as such, there are people who want to be vetted by us. They see us as the gold standard. They want to be vetted and know that they have done all of the CCAR training and they have kind of the CCAR stamp of approval. And that's really what the recovery coach professional designation does for folks. So I think for some, it's a matter of, yeah, I want, professional people to see that I've gone through the training and I know that what I need to do to be a recovery coach. And for some, it's just a personal goal to be vetted by CCAR.
Yeah, I'm remembering and smiling that after I took the program and then I was ready to take, I'm going to call it the final exam
Yeah.
for just for lack of any other word. And I studied, boy, I studied everything that was in the, all the content. And then I was pleasantly surprised that the final exam was a conversation of questions. How would I react as a recovery coach? So given various scenarios, and how would I react? And I just felt was certainly wasn't what I expected, but it really made me understand that everything that I have done up until this point, beyond my own addiction story, but my work as a life coach, my work as an educator, my being a mom and a sister, and a wife, a friend. Like, it seemed like everything came into this final exam, because you really needed to say, how would I react? And I liked it. I liked it. Do you have various people reacting differently to how that's played out?
I think people expect as you do, like they expect to come in and be given a series of multiple choice questions and what am I going to do? And I think what we know about recovery coaching is that it's different. It's it's like those books where it's like choose your own adventure. If you decide to do go down this path, you turn to page 53, and if you decide to go down this path, go to ahead to page 200. It's
Right.
gonna differ depending on the person and depending on the relationship you have with that person. What might be that next good question to ask that person that might motivate them to do
Yes.
something different? And that's gonna be different for each person. And so we really look at, if you think about the foundational principles of recovery coaching, which we believe are actively listening, asking good questions, discovering and managing our own stuff while treating that person as their own best resource. um those are the questions that we want to know. That's what we wanted, and there's no way to really do that
Yeah.
um in an examination without
Yeah.
giving you the opportunity to interact,
Yeah. I mean,
so
it really was very successful. And so, I just want to thank you and Phil and CCAR for the impact that getting my recovery coach professional designation has had. I think that it even opened up this opportunity here
mm,
for me to have the confidence that I need to have a recovery radio show and podcast. And
mm,
now, as you know, we're in conversation. I have a program called the Right Recovery, WRITE, where I'm helping people with recovery through writing. So CCAR has been very important in my life, and I am sure to the many other professionals and the family and friends and the public that they serve. So thank you so much for that. And so we're coming to the end of the show. I just want to say to everyone, if you're struggling with addiction, there's always help for you. There's professional organizations that can help you. You can even go inside and listen to your own inner guidance, but know that help is always available to you. And I'd like to thank Stacy Charpentier for being here and for the wonderful work that you're doing at CCAR. And if you would like to meet with me to talk about my writing programs, please go to my website, clarity.com, CLARE-ITY, and book a 30-minute free consultation. So until next time, everybody, have a wonderful journey. Thank you. Thank you for tuning into Hungry for Answers. Learning to love ourselves is the one true solution to addiction. Make a commitment to healing today and see how you can reach your ultimate potential. Remember, you have a divine right to a life filled with love, joy, peace, and abundance. To learn more about me and my offerings, please go to clarity.com. That's Clare, CLARE -ITY.com. See you next time.